Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Leanna Wade, and I am the Regulatory Policy Associate at the App Association and Connected Health Initiative. We are so excited to have you here today as the world of Web3 continues to gain interest and intrigue from lawmakers and industry leaders alike. The potential for this technology goes beyond popular terms like crypto, NFTs, and gaming. The healthcare space is on the brink of a revolution, and the third iteration of the internet, as we know it, has a role to play in its future. During today's Watering the Tech Desert webinar, we will explore current and future use cases of Web3 in relation to mitigating health disparities across underserved communities. We will discuss electronic health records on the blockchain, privacy and security considerations related to Web3 infrastructure, and more. The App Association's Amplify Diverse Talent Working Group is excited to give you an opportunity to hear from and ask questions to our expert panel, who will shed light on the benefits of Web3 and blockchain applications in digital health. Before we jump into questions, I'll open the floor up to our panel to give us a brief introduction, beginning with Dr. Houston.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Leah Houston. I'm an emergency physician, and I'm the founder of HPEC, which is a digital identity solution that aims to mobilize physician workforce, get people back to work working quicker, and also create automated trusted referral networks within the physician community. For those of you who have interacted with the healthcare system, you probably have noticed that doctors are overworked. There's not enough of them. And so a solution like ours will create secure, direct connections with patients. So thank you.
Thank you. And next, can we have Tom Petersell?
Hello, my name is Tom Petersell. I'm the founder of a couple of digital health startups on a mission to help users take control of their health through access to their data, through tools and understanding of their data, and really be able to take action. More recently, empowering or employing the blockchain and AI to facilitate that goal, to gamify the experience, and to bring the cost down to near zero. Prior to that, I spent about 20 years at IBM, and where this is relevant is really the learning of how solutions are being deployed, how organizations and companies are embracing solutions versus tolerating solutions. And what I think we need to see here is an embracing of technology, embracing of the blockchain, and decision makers understanding the risks and opportunities and selecting the right use cases to be embraced early while supporting innovations for future use of more complex challenges.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to go to Dr. Kahana.
Hi, and thank you. It's a pleasure to meet everyone, and thank you for doing this very important educational effort. I'm a physician by training and considered one of the OGs in crypto health. My daily work consists of helping countries through my position at the United Nations as an expert in blockchain and healthcare to help countries and large communities do Web3 transformation. So I like to think that I'm in the convergence of emerging technologies with emerging markets and emerging business models. And I'm looking forward to a very fascinating and intensive conversation.
Awesome. And last but not least, I'd like to open it up to Evan McMullen.
GM, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to the App Association for hosting this wonderful conversation. I'm honored to be here, with our other panelists to discuss these topics today. My name is Evan McMullen, and I am the co-founder of a number of DAOs, for those who might be familiar with the concept of a decentralized autonomous organization. But today I'm here in my capacity as the co-founder of Disco.xyz. We are your identity for the metaverse. And at Disco, we believe that the metaverse is your ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and receive a personalized experience based on the parts of yourself that you choose to share. So what this means is that we are the purveyors of what we call data backpacks. We make it it easy for individuals and organizations to own and control data written about them and to carry it with them from one app to another, from Web 2 to Web 3 into physical space and back. So the type of data that you can carry around in your backpack and share with others includes everything from your membership in organizations, your preferred pronouns, primary language, all the way up to critical data about your health. So when we talk about data portability, when we talk about interoperability and sovereignty, the rights of the body and the justice that we can invoke with ownership of data, DISCO provides the infrastructure for applications and services to be able to issue or give out data that can be carried around by its subject. We empower individuals like you and me to own and control that data and carry it with us in the same way we would carry our Apple Wallet credentials from one place to another. Then we also support applications that are able to then rely on this data that you bring to their front door the very first time so that you never have to fill out a form again. So that is our vision at DISCO. Really excited to discuss all of the ways that we sort of touch and support the health ecosystem. And if you remember, nothing else from this conversation, let it be known that the keys that come with your crypto wallet are like a personal notary stamp. So you can own and control and verify any kind of data, not just financial data. So really excited to talk today about all of the Web3 use cases where we are extending our capabilities beyond the financial into ownership and individual sovereignty. And for a little bit of background, I come to the Web3 space from more of an academic bent, got excited about Web3 a little over 10 years ago before we even had that term, when it was just Bitcoin, and have been building out human accessible systems using this technology ever since.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And as the conversation progresses today, audience, we invite you to submit your questions in the chat box, and we will be sure to get to them at the end. As you all can hear, we have some very high level experts on our panel today. So with that being said, let's jump into the first question. For us folks that lack the technical background in this space, can you all give us a foundation by defining what Web3 is and distinguishing it from the internet as we've come to understand it? And I open this up to anyone.
I'm happy to kick off. So when we think about the first versions of the internet, Web 1.0, we might describe that as read. So the ability to visit a website and read information that someone else has published. Then in Web 2.0, the social web, the internet that we hang out in today, some folks call this the read-write web. So where we can read information that others have posted, we can share our own contributions in the forms of likes, subscriptions, comments, blogs, and other sorts of things. In this third generation of the web that we are encountering now, we have the ability to read, write, and own. So Web3, blockchains enabled by private keys and public ledgers allow us to own and control a digital asset where no one else can have a copy. So unlike normal files where you can make a copy and give it to someone else, blockchains allow us to have digital scarcity. So we can have a digital asset that we own, we give to someone else, and we don't have it anymore. So introducing the idea of digital rival goods. When we think about a blockchain, it's basically just a public database where there are many different people keeping a copy so that no one person can change what's in that database. Everyone has to agree what's in it. Now, the challenge here, of course, is that data is public and it is permanent. So if you remember nothing else about blockchains from today, remember, write once, never erase. A public blockchain is more public than putting data on a billboard in Times Square. It means that data is accessible to anyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection for all time. And so if your data does not require global public availability to everybody forever, you probably do not need a blockchain. However, the account that you use to interact with a blockchain, what's sometimes called a wallet, allows you to own and control tokens and on-chain assets, but also allows you to own and control any kind of data. And happy to share with my other co-panelists. I'm sure we all spend quite a lot of time talking about these.
So Liana, maybe I'll try and just add a little bit of more flavor to what Evan accurately stated. In the most simplest of terms, I would say that blockchain is the software solution to the social problem of trust. We are now suffering from an erosion in our ability to cooperate The polarization that we're experiencing is actually a manifestation of that inability to cooperate. We can't even sit around the table and talk about things. And by the virtue of the transparency of the data that is put on what Evan described, a database, it actually creates a, if you wish, social software that allows us to be a little bit more cohesive. And I think that all the products that you'll see from it, when we talk about DAOs and when we talk about tokens and when we talk about all kinds of features of that, is really fundamentally the ability not to create interoperability, which is something that keeps technologists awake at night, but it's more about intercooperability and the ability to really find a win-win and reasons to work together.
I'd like to just, add to all of this, and it was an amazing explanation. I actually love these little taglines that you guys have come up with. When we say blockchain, we also need to be very careful about understanding the difference between closed and permissioned blockchains versus open and permissionless blockchains. So, Evan was talking more about these open permissionless blockchains where anyone can participate, anyone can have access, it's open access. There's lots of companies who are using closed permissioned blockchains that also similarly cannot be erased, but they control access to these things. They also, have the potential to have collusion and things like that. So, when looking at different projects, keep in mind which blockchains are they using, and from a business perspective and from a personal use perspective, understand whether or not it's serving your needs in that way.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I subscribe to everything I just heard, and then to really bring it down to earth for the average Gen X and what it does for them today. It's really a tool to improve trust between people and systems, which we know is problematic this day and age. It's provided in a secure environment, more secure than the environment we have today in Web 2. And it allows users to create and consume while being rewarded according to their contribution, which are all fundamental to providing equity and providing a lot of opportunity to those that don't have it.
Excellent. What a great foundation you guys just laid for us here. And each of you discussed the blockchain at large. How does blockchain technology driving Web3 play a role in connected health? And what solutions can Web3 provide to our most prevalent healthcare issues that we're seeing today?
Maybe you can just point out who do you want to answer, because otherwise we're just going to stay.
Sure. Sure. So if we can
attribute it to someone.
Sure. If we can actually start with Dr. Houston and.
Sure. So there's lots of use cases for blockchain in healthcare. A lot of us discuss, a supply chain of pharmaceuticals. Our particular use case is primarily around physician identity and credential management, which, for those of you who are familiar, for example, with the recent surprise billing legislation, when you really get down to it, this is about whether or not the doctor that you're seeing is credentialed to accept payment from whatever the payment source is, whether it's a public insurance, public CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid, or whether it's an insurance company. So, the day that you actually book the surgery, that doctor might be credentialed by that, insurance company, but then the day the actual surgery happens, they might not be. Similarly, a hospital might say they take your insurance, but there might be a doctor in that hospital that doesn't. And right now, this is what's been creating the number one cause of bankruptcy, of personal bankruptcy in the United States, which is medical debt. Because these people get a surprise bill for something they thought they were covered for, simply because data authentication isn't automated, streamlined, and immediate. It's, and so that's the problem that we're solving. It's really a problem of supply chain of physician talent. And there's lots of other use cases as well. A lot of people talk about patient records. But similarly, how are you actually going to receive those records? How are those records documented? Currently they're on closed systems. that the health system or the place that you went to owns data, and you it somehow. Via faxes, confusing and difficult to read. Through these protocols, you push and pull data directly from individual to individual in a peer-to-peer fashion. And so you can actually own your records and things like that. And so those are the three, top use cases that I think of, but there's a lot more.
To take Leah's excellent beginning, and we've talked about this for years, Leah and I, just to take one step back, is that what people need to understand is that the current healthcare system thrives on two things. One is data illiquidity. There's a lot of data, but that data doesn't flow. So even if you're in the hospital, the system that you have on the second floor is not necessarily the same one on the third floor. So data is stuck, and in that sense becomes useless for everyone, not just for the patients and for the physicians. And also there's proliferation of intermediaries because of data asymmetry. In other words, I know something that you don't know. And so if you want to know it, I'll whisper it in your ear, but you have to pay me a lot of money. And that's why we have all these data warehouses and all these, data hoarders and analytics and pseudo analytics and non-analytics and things of that sort. So if we understand that that's basically the business model of the Web 2, you can understand that there is a reluctance or a resistance, or at least a deep thinking about what this type of peer-to-peer technology offers in terms of expanding business opportunities. So like Leah said, we can track stuff, which is supply chain. We can track people, which is credentialing. We can track people and stuff, which is decentralized clinical trials. And when I say decentralized clinical trials, I don't mean the everyday jargon that everybody uses in terms of, oh, I'm using, telehealth or a webcam, and that's decentralized. I'm talking really about a data architecture, a structure, and governance that's built in a way that is decentralized. And I saw that one of the questions from the audience pertains to that. So how do you not host it in one place that is a point of failure? And then, of course, there are the electronic health records that you mentioned. And of course, the most, I think, interesting, alluding to my previous response and what Leah's working on, is really creating a DAO. How do you organize people in a way where they interact voluntarily? They find, like what we call in game theory, the Schelling point, where they gravitate towards some type of cooperation because it's a win-win-win. So I think that we're moving from this kind of like zero-sum game, that if I have more, or if you have more, I have less, to rather moving into an abundance mindset that with data, it's endless. And actually, and then we call that in a blockchain jargon, a network effect. We put people first, then product second, and then profits third, and not the other way around.
I'd like to add, just imagine the average the average American having 17 data streams on their watch, on their phone, through a private lab, through their doctor, and other means. How do we aggregate? How do we consolidate that data so we can provide value to that user without exposing the identity, without exposing the data from one provider to another? And the blockchain, through simple technologies that have existed for a while, like zero trust and zero knowledge, can allow pretty much immediately functionality like that then offers the opportunity to aggregate all this data and take action years before needing to see a physician, practicing prevention, optimizing your health. And these are things we don't need to necessarily wait for the technology to evolve, but rather things that are available to us right now. So connected health is here and now. We simply need to empower people to practice it and access it.
I think you make a really outstanding point there, that health is what happens every day, and medical intervention is what happens inside of the doctor's office. And there is not, we do not cease to experience health when we leave our physician spaces. And so the ability to passively collect your data as you live your life and move through it, and the ability to interact with that information to learn more about yourself, so you're an informed patient, so that you can effectively advocate on your own behalf. These are all capabilities that we're opening with these new technologies. One other thing, that's maybe maybe a little less sexy, but pretty administrative, is that Americans spend about 11.5 billion hours every year filling out forms. Right now, we do not have the ability to carry a copy of our home address from one window in our, on our computer to another application, let alone from one doctor's office to another. And so when we think about the administrative, I think about the last time you went to see a physician or got a procedure, there's quite a lot of paperwork involved there. And every field that you handwrite in a form is a piece of data that, as Dr. Kahana was saying, becomes trapped in a silo and useless to no one. So as we think about the rights and, the sort of rights and freedoms that we enjoy as citizens in America, the body of data that describes us, that exists because we exist, does not enjoy the same rights as our physical body, even though it may be as useful to us, and it may be even, not more useful than the data that we can obtain today. So when we think about health justice and being able to deliver a higher quality of care across the board, when we think about the benefits that we enjoy from state legislation like CCPA that increases the data sovereignty and rights that individuals have, we as builders and creators and definers of our way forward, we all have a shared opportunity to take advantage of these capabilities rather than building another architecture of the internet like we already have, where we're producing a ton of data that ends up in a form that is not useful to anyone.
And practicing asynchronous health, right? That's something we should all be doing all the time. Or asynchronous healthcare, right? Being provided care continuously on a moment's notice without necessarily relying on a system or a professional in order to do something that's good for us and good for the system.
Sure, absolutely. And Evan, you brought up a really interesting term in health justice. And, we've seen how patient data is particularly vulnerable in Web 2. How can blockchain play a role in protecting consumer privacy and health data as it relates to underserved and disenfranchised communities? Like, what does that look like?
So right now we have no ability to own our health data. So we don't really know what it looks like. But what we can guess from the technologies that we do have and what is feasible is that, for example, the ability to carry data about yourself from one provider to another, the ability to retain copies of your vital documents, especially if you're moving from one space to another space, you don't have a lot of stability, your life is changing, et cetera. And so from many different aspects, there are ways that we can improve the quality of care we have if we have good information. Now, when we think about data justice in general, there are a lot of ways in America's history where a failure to honor the rights of minorities and women when it comes to their bodily sovereignty have been violated. For example, even if we think about issues like Roe v. Wade, that is a data privacy discussion. And so I think it is imperative for us to consider the consequences of the design choices that we make of the systems that we have today. So whether that's systems that are not interoperable with other primary languages outside of English, systems that are not able to interact, across state lines, these are all, consequences of our design that have outcomes for patients. So, for example, if we publicize health data in a way that is, not centered around the individual patient, we can have concerns such as many hospitals today in America selling patient data in exchange for startup equity or privileged access to resources and services. And so when we think about the communities that are most harmed when corners are cut like that, when there are not adequate rights of protection, often these are marginalized communities who are already not set up to be sort of in the having access to the greatest resources at that time. I would also definitely, ask the good doctors here on their perspective of how, inconsistency of health resources throughout our nation can be addressed with more equitable technology.
I can share a personal story or professional story, I guess. I've had many patients that I've had an encounter something like this, where, they're presenting in a certain way where, for example, this particular patient of mine, she presented with what seemed to be an immunodeficiency or HIV, and it wasn't on her record. And when I asked her, she said she didn't have it. And when I sat down with her and I pressed her on it because it was going to really affect how we made decisions about her care, she said, well, listen, I have HIV, but I don't want it in my record. I don't want it to be shared all over the place. And so it puts me as a physician who was working in a public hospital in a difficult situation. I mean, it's a reportable condition. It's reportable if she's been exposing her partners and things like that. So I legally have to report that. But I do believe that she should have a right to protect that information if, for example, she wasn't coming in for any reason having to do with this. I do believe that people need to have agency over, their private information, be it, personal or public. And there are lots of potential theoretical solutions around creating data containers where you can have, different levels of data that are shared easily and freely versus very private and only shared if given special permissions. We can use zero knowledge proofs for things like this, but what's important is that the people who are actually designing these solutions are considering the individuals and their specific needs. We can't put ourselves, in an anthropological conundrum by creating and designing solutions that actually cause more harm than good. And so that's part of why I'm really grateful that everyone's here today to have this conversation, to be aware of these problems so that we can make the right decision, because, we're uniquely in a very, unprecedented moment where like the regulatory environment is starting to really say, well, privacy is important and access is important. And how do we balance these two things? And how do we answer these questions? And so for the first time in history, at least I believe, technology is actually providing solutions to these problems that we've had for so long. So it's a very exciting time.
So I want to take both on what Evan and Leah spoke about the privacy and justice, and allude a little bit to the legislative body of really how we think about things, and understand that these are not technical or technological issues, because the technology already is out there. So assume that it is solved. But the question is, why are we not seeing it? Why is the legal framework in Europe concentrated around privacy, and in the United States around security, and nobody's talking about self-sovereignty and ownership? And actually, except the state of New Hampshire, 49 states, your data actually does not belong to you. And the producer of that data is kind of like softly obliged not to make too many hurdles and not charge you too much money and give you perhaps in the next year or so the data that you want. And I think that it comes to the fundamental idea that we don't think of data as dignified labor. We don't say, I am my actions, and my actions are captured by data. So when there is a third party, a large platform, and what everybody's now talking about Section 230 and all these things going on, when they take that data and they use it and abuse it, doesn't matter if I agree to it on page 147 with font 3 and didn't understand what I'm signing on. They're taking a piece of me without my informed consent. And so we're not talking about privacy preserving technologies, we're talking about dignity preserving technologies. And to Evan's point, of course, it is those who are excluded from the economic activity of society that are most vulnerable. Now, why is it? Why would blockchain, why would a decentralized, distributed technology include more people and help the unbanked or underbanked, or the uneducated, undereducated, the unhealthed and the underhealthed? Why would it? Because, and I'll ask you a question, Liana, very, very, very simple one. What is the opposite of health? And I apologize for Leah and Tom who heard this spiel already. What is the opposite of health? The opposite of health is, it's not a trick question. The opposite of health is?
You're on mute. Sickness?
Oh,
Disease?
yes, illness, disease.
Illness, right? Okay,
Right.
so both because of Tom and Leah, we're in this problem because they're wrong. Because I would argue with you that the opposite of health is not illness or sickness or disease. The opposite of is isolation. That through disease, illness, you become isolated. Even if you have a support system, you feel isolated. So if you agree, just for the sake of this conversation, for 20 seconds, that the opposite of health is isolation, then the journey back to health is connectedness. So how do we connect? We connect to our family, to our friends, to our data, to our faith, to society. That is how we create. It doesn't matter if it's a church or a synagogue or a Tao, but that is how we get to wellness. And so I explain it to my 16-year-old that if you take the I out of illness and you replace it with we, what do you get? You get wellness. And so blockchain is a we technology. Now, we can talk about all the things we read on the paper, and we can have all kinds of things, didn't work well and that didn't work well, and people behaved poorly and all that, that's fine. But essentially, blockchain, by its DNA, by its nature, is a we technology. And so we transform people from passive health service users to active health and wealth producers. And this is why this is so important for underserved communities, for health justice, and of course, the idea of self-sovereignty and ownership.
Yeah, that's great. If I may, to Alex's point, a practical way where we can see value today, because again, to your point, the technology exists. This is not about a futuristic technology we need to support and advance. I was speaking to an Indigenous community leader from Northern Canada, and she had quite a few concerns about the communities and their concerns about their health data being exploited. And if you consider the fact that these communities already have mistrust in the system, they don't leverage healthcare to the extent that they should, they disproportionately suffer from chronic diseases. Just the idea, never mind the implementation, the successful implementation, but the idea that these communities can have sovereignty over that data, that can potentially benefit from the data, improving their health, and maybe even financially benefit from the data, can completely shift the perception of how to engage with health data, how to practice prevention, and that alone, just that perception alone can make all the difference in the world. Regardless of what technology is being used, how successful the deployment is, and the implementation. And these are opportunities we can engage with today.
Wow, so much great stuff there. And very happy that you brought up that example from Indigenous communities. It's so important. And I'd like to circle back a bit to something that Dr. Kahana mentioned of blockchain being used as something that prioritizes people first, product, and then profit. I think that was such a profound statement. And I'm hoping you can kind of expand on that in the global sense on exactly what you mean by that and how, blockchain can continue to, mitigate issues, a variety of issues relating to costs, again, the security, vulnerability, discrimination and bias, and other health disparities.
Well, I'll let the technologists, speak about how do they assure, a seamless 24/7, 365 transfer of value and data in a way that has little to none fees, and it's unencumbered on those lean economies who cannot sustain the cost of intermediaries that contribute little to none to the outcome. Because when I buy my $9 latte in New York City, I can assure you that fractions of a penny go to the coffee bean farmer. So I think that really, in essence, what we're trying to understand is that if everybody thrives, and this is not an idea that is strange to capitalism or to our culture, if everybody thrives, then it really lifts everybody up. And this idea of hyper growth and this idea of endless growth, without trying to solve the externalities that it encumbers into the common, what we call the commons, is simply not sustainable. Now, I know that there are people that don't like the use sustainable and they're kind of feel a little bit trite and all that. So I like to say it's not good business. It's not good business. And I'm a big fan of this, Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. That it's called donut economics, or where it's clear that we want growth, but we want it at a point that it really optimizes network effects. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do I prefer to do one deal that gives me $1 billion, or 1 billion deals that do $1. And this I saw, in my travels in Africa, mostly, and in Latin America, when you stop at just a block and you see thousands of merchants, there's no B to C to B to business to, it's each citizen is its business. And all that business that is happening, trillions of shillings are going back and forth in that block, are not captured. They're not captured by the government. They're not captured by a society. They're just, it's like, it's lost. And the work that we're doing with blockchain, where we can take data, assign it a value. Once you do that, then you can trade it, and then you can exchange it, and then you can capture that data and reward people to contribute to the sustenance and the success of whatever economic activity you do. And that's the idea of putting people first, and then afterwards, profit will come. If your people are engaged and they're in a community that wants this to succeed, profits will come and will surpass any thoughts that you had where I don't need to really invest in people.
Dr. Khan, I think you make a really outstanding point when we note the importance of humans in these systems, right? Blockchains, like the internet, are human coordination tools. Emphasis on the human, right? You can't have a blockchain by yourself. That's a database. And so, if we're building systems for human beings that allow anyone to participate, and based on who they are, what they bring to the table, what they have chosen to share, we can curate experiences around them. This helps to basically allows us to scale up new technologies in the same way that we did with the internet. But rather than trapping your work product, your labor, your data inside of the single website where you create it, instead allowing you to carry that dignified work product with you from one space to another, invites you to save time and complexity, to remove opportunities for human error, to enjoy personalized experiences with greater efficiency and lower cost. And so I think, something to sort of summarize this concept of global accessibility is that, again, blockchains are not like a net new planet that we're going to explore. They are an additional bootstrapped layer on top of the internet we already enjoy, that basically builds upon the tools that we already have to allow us to build new kinds of coordination, to enjoy new kinds of ownership. And as Dr. Kahana said, to capture this data that is flying off of our bodies as we move through the world in a form that is useful to us and to our surroundings. I think we will look back on this time in history as a moment when our government forgot us, when other nations chose to guard the sovereignty and dignified work product of their citizens in a way that was optimized for their health, their well-being, and their safety. I'm very hopeful that in the United States that we can recognize similar sovereignty and value in the work that our citizens produce, as other nations have recognized the work of their citizens.
Amen.
I can give, again, a practical example for that beautifully described opportunities. If you consider a large insurer just last week announcing that they're going to pay, an American insurer with 30 million patients, that they're going to pay up to $1,000 per user for tracking their health data. Not even improving upon the measurements, but just tracking it. And the idea that we can do something similar using the blockchain, and we can reward you for almost every step you take. We can reward you for every hour you sleep. We can reward you for every minute you read a report that explains to you what all this information means. We can reward you for every 1 point of BMI you dropped, if that's your goal. And we can do that continuously and incrementally. And Web 2 today won't allow you to do that because the cost of transactions and the measuring itself is larger than our ability to reward and incentivize you. And with a blockchain, that's flipped. We can have thousands of engagements, thousands of transactions that incrementally reward you and change behavior for practically no cost. So all the administrative costs and all the costs of paying out actually goes directly to the user, directly to the patient with the aim of improving outcomes and shifting the way they're perceiving their health and practicing prevention. So that's a use case for something that's being done today in Web 2 at very high cost, and something that we can replicate with very, very low cost using the blockchain.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, Dr. Houston.
No, I really have not much to add. It's just, we're in this situation where everything's being done manually, and all these pockets of data are everywhere. So the automation world is upon us, and these tools do have the ability to, automate privacy, automate regulatory compliance, automate administrative processes, and provide actual hard consent if they're properly designed. We talk about consent, like, Dr. Kahana alluded to, the 3 font on page 10 of the HIPAA form and your signature at the bottom, that's not consent. That's not hard consent. That's passive, not real consent, because you don't even know what you're reading. So, through these systems, if you properly design them, you can automate consent and automate all those things.
So actually, to jump in really quick, just on one important point about consent, because I think this is a really key concept when we talk about these technologies. So right now, on a public blockchain, if I know your wallet address, your public address, basically your street address on the blockchain, I can send anything that I want into your wallet. I can map any token that I want to your public address in the same way that if I know your mailing address at home, I can send you any postcard that I would like. Now, the challenge with a blockchain is that when data is mapped to your wallet, is sent to you, anyone on Earth and in space with an internet connection for all time can see that data and see its association if this is a public blockchain. So there's no consent layer on public blockchains. At Disco, what we have made possible is adding consent to a public blockchain so that when you receive data in your data backpack, you choose whether or not you want to take it, put it in your backpack, and you choose where and when to share it. And so I know there's a lot of, talk about sort of public blockchains and tokens. So just want to differentiate that when you're using a public blockchain and an NFT or a token, that's going to be visible to everyone on Earth and in space forever. If you're using your blockchain keys to secure something like a data backpack where that data is private, or as Dr. Houston mentioned earlier, you're using a private blockchain where that's not going to be visible to everybody, then you're going to have greater degrees of control and opportunities to provide consent that a public blockchain alone does not afford.
Excellent. Thank you for building on that. And I want to take a moment. We have a few questions coming in from our audience. And I'd like to, pose this first question to you, Tom. Someone asked, what's one strategy to start dismantling making inroads into the current legacy systems, i.e. The opaque healthcare information exchange architecture? Any feedback on that question?
I've been paying very close attention to the 21st Century Cures Act and the new US CDI and TEFCA standards that are coming out, because that's exactly what they're meant to do. They're meant to, if you actually read the language in these standards, item 4003 and 4005 of the 21st Century Cures Act, it says that that your health data needs to be not only immediately accessible, but it needs to be understandable. And so, for those of you who are on this call who are in charge of writing this legislation and actually enforcing these guidelines, it's really up to you to make sure that these strategies actually comply with these rules that we, our own government, has come up with in order to solve these problems. Because if we make the rule, but then we don't create an enforceable and protocolized strategy to make sure that that rule is actually enforced and to follow up and actually make sure people are compliant, then patients are going to be exactly where they are today, where they have access to nothing, and the things that they do have access to are hard to get and not understandable to them. So in my opinion, it's enforce the rules that are already created and make sure that any new created technologies that are implemented are actually following the guidelines, and actually able to be enforced by design.
I know Tom wants to answer, but I'll insert here just that we need to understand also, and I think that this is what's missing from the conversation. If there's one thing that I would love the audience to go back and say, okay, this is what I remember, and I'll be as direct as possible, is that we lack the even reflex of thinking that users can participate in the economic activity. Because to the point of Dr. Houston saying, okay, there's this transparency, hospital transparency bill, and 14% of hospitals are applying it. It's because those, then we should make ways to enforce it more. But we can't punish everyone because they are not compliant. Already we suffer from compliance fatigue. What we need is to create a business model that makes it worthwhile for people to participate in the economic activity. So let me just give an example of, we're giving the talk here. So how did this go? So you and the organizers reached out and said, Alex, we love your stuff, blah, blah, blah. Can you come? Can you do this? And all of us are here. And why are we doing this? Because we're passionate about our work, because we believe it has value, and that we hope that we'll convert the hundreds of people who are listening into mini ambassadors of understanding really what blockchain is, and not the last meme that's on Twitter. Okay. But the point is that all this activity is not captured. It's not captured in any sense that it's if you wish, it's not translated into a digital asset or into a token. So if we'd have, for example, Liana coins and say, fine, everyone who participates in this would get X Liana coins. Okay, what do I do with these Liana coins? I don't know. It doesn't matter. You can find with us, for example, that if we get Liana coins, then next time we come and we visit Congress, we're going to have a cafeteria and have it at half the price. It doesn't matter what the incentive is. But what is important is that we are included in the economic activity. Our contribution is quantified and translated, and to Evan's point, is always there for both monetary and non-monetary rewards. Because what's the non-monetary reward? I get a lot of coins, then I have a 5 stars and say, listen to Dr. Kahana because the stuff that he says is really good. And so more people will invite to listen to us. That's the whole point, that we already are engaging spontaneously on Web 2 with endless internet-based communities. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Reddit, we're on Twitter, we are on Facebook, we are tons of stuff. We spend most of our time on these online communities, and they're moderated by one who can shut you off because they didn't like what you said, or you promoted someone and you weren't supposed to do, and you didn't meet community guidelines, and boof, you're out. And it's not clear or transparent so that we can sit and say, okay, what are the rules? Why did Tom last week say something and he wasn't doxxed, but when I say it suddenly, I don't have access to that. So all we're talking about is that the blockchainized or the Web3 internet doesn't look different. It'll be the same as we have the internet now, but the behind the scenes structure of identity, of security, of privacy, of ownership, of the business model will be much more fair and inclusive and equitable. And really, you cannot seriously talk about mental health and physical health without talking about financial health. And this is why it's important that we transform everyone with good health to have the capabilities of directly enjoying their healthy behaviors and not just saving money for payers or insurers or the government.
That was beautiful. And to build on what Dr. Houston said and Dr. Kahana, 21st Century Cures Act mandates that patients should have access to their information and an ability to understand it. I think that's not necessarily something that we can claim has been accomplished. Now, consider the alternative of making that accessible and easy. A third party, let's call it China, can come up with something like TikTok for healthcare. You bring us any of your data and we'll secure it for you and we'll make it super fun for you to engage with it. We'll give you videos explaining it all and give you crypto rewards for engaging with that data. Not China holds the data for 300 million Americans, their health data, and the ability to engage with them and monetize it. If we don't do that, somebody else will. And the ability to explain to a user today using GPT or Chat GPT what their data means, to play around with it, to gamify, to empower them to do something about it at practically no cost is, again, an opportunity that we're seeing passing us by for no good reason other than for the virtue signaling of us prioritizing security and privacy without balancing it with what's important to the users and the responsibility we have for helping the population improve their health and steward their health journey, which is what everybody wants to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have a couple more questions coming in from our audience, but we also want to be wary of time. I'd like to get a sense from each of you, just a quick takeaway, something that you'd like for the audience to have with them as they walk away from this webinar. And then we'll do one final question from our audience.
For some quick takeaways, let's remember blockchains are write once, never erase. Just because you get your wallet or keys from a blockchain doesn't mean that you have to use them for financial interactions. You can own and control and carry around any kind of data that you want. And just to make a quick note of some of the questions that we've got here in our Q&A, we've got some questions around, is this true decentralization? And this is not in the spirit of Web3. So I want to remind everyone, there are no rules police. There is no purity test for what decentralization is as a philosophy, what is and is not the spirit of innovation. I think that it is up to all of us as builders, creators, and guides of this new way forward to center our choices around the human beings that they serve. When it comes to design decisions or decentralization, it is most important to ask the question, are we helping the human do the thing better? And not whether or not a solution fits on our philosophical spectrum of what we consider to be centralized or decentralized. Indeed, data that is published on the Ethereum blockchain can be considered centralized because it is bound to a single underlying storage platform. So just want to remind everyone that we've got a lot of buzzwords and concepts here today, but the most important thing, the reason that we have all gathered here is to serve human beings.
Yeah, I'd like to just continue Evan's thought, a string of thought is, if there's a take home for me, and technologists hate that when I say it, technology doesn't do anything. It's what people do with that technology that matters. And is that hammer going to sculpt a beautiful Michelangelo, Moses, or David, or is it going to just break stuff? And I always say to myself that I will know that we got to a place where, at least I'm sure the panel by conviction believes that that's the role of blockchain within the Web3 transformation, is that when I will find books about blockchain, not in the tech section and not in the business section, but I'll actually find it in the philosophy section, the social studies section, then I will know that this is really how we're trying to figure out to work together in the digital world, because we're moving there. We're moving from a physical to a digital. Now we're talking about the phygital and the immersive technologies and the metaverse and all these. So I always say the number that comes after web, web 1, 2, 3, 4, is our proximity to the digital world. So web 1, as we just looked at it, it was very far. Whatever I had in paper, I saw it on a screen, but I couldn't do anything with it. Web 2 now, I can do the stuff that Evan talked about, upload, download, subscribe, stuff like that. But still, it's separate from me. Web 3, I'm starting to be in it, own it, maybe be a little bit in it, thanks to metaverse and AR, VR, XR, whatever. Web 4 will be, I am in it. I am in that with brain-computer interfaces, and it'll be an extension of my brain. Just like my iPhone is an extension of my brain, because if I forget something on my iPhone, it's not that I just lost my phone. I really lost important memories, data, information that I can't retrieve. So as we're moving closer and closer into that digital world, which the internet is that interface between the two, blockchain is one of the foundations that will allow us to interface it in a way that is not only meaningful, but allows us to collaborate as a society.
Yeah, you know, we keep talking about the individual and we keep talking about the people. And, you know, when we're talking about these things and building these things and designing them, think of who's actually doing that. You know, I personally am a doctor. I went to medical school so I could learn how to prevent death and permanent disability for my future patients so I could best serve them. I took an oath to put my patients first before all else and to do no harm. And I did that with the hope and the expectation that the people that were building the systems around me that were supposed to be helping me care for my patients were going to build them with my patients in mind, and we're going to make systems easier. You know, I personally started residency training right as HIPAA was coming out and high tech was coming out, and as EMRs were starting to become mainstream. So we went from paper to electronic records during my training, and things got much, much, much worse and much, much harder. And if we look at what's happened to the cost of healthcare, you know, it was $3.9 trillion last year, and it's $4.2 trillion this year. But mortality is going up, you know, and outcomes are worse. And, you know, infant mortality is worse and maternal mortality is worse, and all across almost every, you know, so we're paying more and we're getting less. And the people who decided that they wanted to serve patients are being decimated with and pummeled with paperwork and administrative burden to the point that we're quitting medicine and we're dying by suicide at a faster rate than any profession. So when you think about who's designing these solutions, think about who those people are, what their intention was, where they come from, what they know and understand, and make sure that the people who are designing the solutions are actually you know, have had that intention for a long time, and there's a demonstrated intention in their long-term, you know, work behavior and things like that. And it's up to us. It's up to us to make those decisions and to decide. And yeah, I mean, putting patients first has to actually be done by people that actually care about patient outcomes and who have demonstrated over these years. So it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to see the systems that are currently in place, you know, and try to really hold them accountable to design them this way.
I would say that if you're listening to this and you're wondering about the complexity, the skills, technical skills, and blockchain literacy that might be required in order to participate in this economy and some of these opportunities, I would just give an example of what we managed to build as a small startup, early stage. We can offer you an ability or the opportunity to bring your data and within 30 seconds, tell you what that data means, your heart rate variability, blood pressure, lab results. Tell you what it means in an educational format, not prescriptive or diagnostic. Open a wallet for you, deposit crypto for you, anonymously, all within 30 seconds and for less than 1 penny. So that's what could be done today by an early stage startup, which means to me that in terms of what's out there and what's possible, the sky's the limit.
Awesome. You heard it. The sky's the limit. We could easily keep going on this topic as it really does need more than just an hour's length discussion. But unfortunately, our time is up. There were some incredible questions from the audience, so we will be following up with you all after this webinar. But I'd again just like to thank our amazing panel, the Amplify Diverse Talent Group at the App Association, and most importantly, all of you. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you leave us feeling informed with new insights into Web3 and the blockchain's role in digital health. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.